Happy Friday, everyone! I'm excited to have the opportunity to give you a little bit of feedback based on your truly excellent reading responses for this week. A lot of you took it as an opportunity to do a little bit of venting about things you're seeing in your placement that you're not too excited about. And a lot of you took it as an opportunity to really reflect and think deeply about what you're going to try to do differently next semester, although even that has a lot of problems and contingencies associated with it. So with that in mind, I'm going to go ahead and get into the assessment and evaluation Q&A. Now, the very first thing I do want to go over is literacy, of course. It's in the title of the class. It's what I do. So with that in mind, I want to reinforce and beat it into your head one last time the definition of literacy. Literacy are the skills that are needed to communicate effectively in a given context. Each of you has a very different context. You know that because you are teaching in different disciplines, you're teaching in different school districts, and you're teaching in different classrooms. However, those skills are going to look fairly similar across the board because those literacy skills we're talking about include reading, writing, speaking, and listening. And let's face it, reading, writing, speaking, and listening, they look very different between a social studies to a math to a science to an ELA classroom. So a lot of you, as you're telling me about literacy skills, what you're really talking about are reading skills. So you're mentioning things like comprehension and vocabulary, which are absolutely accurate. Those are literacy skills we need to teach, but also be thinking about what about those skills needed for students who have to listen to a lecture within your classroom? What about how those students are expected to speak like a mathematician, like a historian? How do those speech patterns and speech choices look different within your context? Also, very quickly, between reading skills and strategies, there's a difference. Skills are those processes that you can then translate to different contexts. Strategies are how you as an instructor make decisions to support and directly and explicitly teach those skills. So strategies are how you teach students to do skills independently. With that in mind, when I asked about literacy skills that you were observing or wanted to observe in your classroom, some of you gave me skills, some of you gave me strategies. So some skills that I heard over and over again were comprehension, listening to lectures, test taking, and understanding visuals and graphics. However, there are many literacy strategies that were mentioned as well, which is perfectly fine. Just recognize that these strategies are linked to skills. So here are a few that stood out that you guys were talking about that I thought were great. All right, now for the actual questions. Only one of you asked this question, but it was important, so I decided it needed to be addressed. You asked, what happens when you don't have the ability to provide accommodations? Wow, that is such a huge question. As you probably remember from TE 404, Teaching the Exceptional Child, IEPs are individualized education plans, and also 504s, which again are individualized instruction plans for students. These are legally required and legally binding, meaning they outline here are the accommodations that every teacher who has this individual student needs to provide. They can be things like extended test taking time, using a calculator on tests, having small groups for testing so they're not in a wide or a large classroom. All of these are legally required by you to be provided. If it is documented by a parent or guardian that these accommodations are not being provided, whether it be by an individual teacher or a school building as a whole, they can sue the school district. With that in mind, it's not a pie in the sky option. It happens quite frequently. I witnessed it happen somewhere between 4 to 5 times when I was a teacher in my last school. So this is something that does happen frequently, and it's nothing to scoff at. It's very important that you make sure any accommodations that students have are being met. Now, most schools recognize how important this is, so they provide the resources to make that happen. They might have a specialized accommodations room or a resource room where you can send students during tests and evaluations to make sure they're being provided those accommodations. They also provide paras or aides that travel with students to classrooms to provide those opportunities to have their accommodations be met. However, let's say a school isn't doing much to provide you with the support you need to fulfill these accommodations. Step 1, figure out, is it something you can provide? For example, If I had a student that needed a test read aloud, I would think to myself, can I do that in a way that wouldn't alienate or spotlight the student? For example, could I just read the test aloud to all students? However, they have the option to work ahead should they so choose. For example, if a student needs extended time, I can give them extended time without making it obvious to other students, by letting them stay late into the next class period, by allowing them to come in early to start a test, or stay late to finish it after school. So there are ways you can do that without making it obvious or needing extra support from your school. Next step, if I'm not able to provide it, every IEP 504 student has a case manager, someone who is responsible for that student. So with that in mind, I would reach out to the case manager and say, here are the accommodations I need, this is the support I need to make sure they're met. And that case manager should help you. And one of the ways they might help you is by reassigning a para or an aide, so paraprofessional or an aide, for that one class period where they are needed. At the end of the day, if you have tried to provide it on your own and you can't, you've contacted the case manager, you've asked for a para or aide and haven't gotten one, I would forward all that documentation onto the principal. So at the end of the day, if that accommodation was not provided, you cannot be held accountable because you tried. You made the best possible effort. All right, I don't want to freak you out, but that is important. Next one, a lot of you pointed out that there's missing feedback when your CMT is giving evaluative feedback or formative feedback to your students. Maybe they provide things like scenarios and points and grade, but they don't actually tell the students what they did wrong or how they could improve. Also, you're noticing that maybe it's because of speed. They feel like they have to get that feedback back quickly. So that might be one of the reasons. You're right. The more effective the feedback, the quicker the feedback is from the time the student submitted the assignment, you know what I'm trying to say. The faster the better. I got there eventually. So I'm seeing that there's a lot of tension between what you want to do and what your CMT is doing. And that could come to a head next semester when you take over the class. So we're going to talk about at the end of this video some strategies for those of you that are already seeing and sensing that tension. Grading homework. All right, should homework always be a grade? That's a great question. And what I would throw back to you is, what is the purpose of the homework? Because if the purpose of the homework is to practice skills, do you need to grade that? If the purpose is to engage or motivate the student, do you need to grade that? Also, is the homework tied to a student learning outcome? Well, then maybe you do need to grade it. But are you grading it as a formative practice assessment, or are you grading it as a summative assessment? If you're grading it as a summative assessment for accuracy, I'd be very wary because you don't know what happens in order for that homework to be completed if it's happening outside of your classroom. So for example, students could be buying the answers online, getting a parent or an older sibling to do it for them. They could genuinely have demands on their time and life where they're not able to complete that homework outside of your classroom. So do you want to assign an evaluation grade to it based on accuracy if you don't know for sure the student actually did the assignment? Which brings me to the idea of grading completion versus accuracy. Now, if you're grading based on completion, then what you're saying is, good job with the process. Good job with thinking like a historian, mathematician, like a writer, like a scientist, to keep working on this and keep trying to solve the problem, even if the product isn't correct. If you're grading it based on accuracy, you're saying, I have taught you this skill explicitly, and I expect you to be able to do it. This is a summative assessment of that skill. So, what is more appropriate for homework? Well, I would say treating it like a formative assessment is probably the better avenue to take. So that would mean grading it based on completion as opposed to accuracy. However, that brings me to rating the score. If you are grading it only for completion, then is that really going to be an accurate reflection on the student's final grade? If the final grade is supposed to show, is the student able to meet the student learning outcomes of this course? So let me tell you what I do with homework, or pardon, what I did when I was a middle school teacher with homework. If I assigned homework, which I'll admit was not often because I understood the demands of my students' time outside of my class, and also I didn't always know who was completing the homework if it was happening outside of my classroom. So when I assigned homework, it would be things like work for 20 minutes. It wouldn't be things like do X, Y, Z. In order to reinforce concepts and give them opportunities to practice those skills. Then I would grade it based on completion as opposed to accuracy. However, in my grade book, it would be such a minimal part of their grade, if it even went into their grade at all, that it was really more of a running record for me to see patterns in those students' work habits than it was to reflect on their grade. So for example, I would typically give them a grade, 0, 1, 2, or 3. 3 meaning they completed it, and I can tell they took time, and I am convinced they did it on their own. A 2 meaning they're almost all the way there, they put time into it. 1 meaning they started it but they didn't finish it, or it was done but it was done sloppily, it was rushed, they didn't spend much time thinking or doing the project, and a 0 meaning they didn't do it at all. Then all those 3 grades, I could look at them over the course of the semester and say, well, that's why you're getting a D in my class. All of your formative grades or all of your homework grades are 0s and 1s. You're not doing the practice, and that reflects on your final grade. And all of those small grades weighted would only make up no more than like 5% of their overall grade. So that's the way that I dealt with homework. It was to develop habits and get students practicing, and it wasn't there to ding their grade or to unfairly represent their grade. So students who had the extra help got good grades, even though maybe their summative assessments didn't actually reflect that. Next up, late work. Whew. This was a tough one, and you guys are struggling to figure out what your policy is going to be. Many of you are figuring out schools already dictate it for you. A lot of you have schools that say 10% off for every day it's late up to 10 days, or two points off, or something along those lines. And then on the other end of the spectrum, so many of you are in schools that say late work is always accepted, they can earn as many points as they need, they can always turn it in. Wow, that's really confusing, and it's a struggle as you're trying to think theoretically what your position is going to be on late work. So here's my guiding question for you. For the work that you're asking students to submit, what was the purpose of it? If you truly believe that it was a summative assessment, or it was a strong piece of evidence of the student meeting the student learning outcomes, then here's my big question for you. Do students learn in different time frames? Because if you truly believe that, you need to give students an opportunity to demonstrate that. So if it's high quality work that you want them to complete and turn in, then you have to give them an incentive to want to complete that work and turn it in. However, even if we present it in that way, there are students who are going to take advantage of the system, especially at the middle school level, where the part of their brain that helps with long-range thinking isn't fully developed. They're going to take advantage of that system. So there are some strategies to prevent the amount of late work and to encourage students to submit it fairly frequently or in a short time frame after it's been assigned, and therefore has the most relevance and impact on their learning. So some of those strategies are to take off late points or to give alternative assignments. Okay, so you didn't complete these 10 problems. If you want to make up that work, here are 10 new problems that have the same exact student learning outcome attached to them. So that way, it's not a matter of giving them extended time to do the same work or getting answers from their friends, but a matter of these are the skills that I'm assessing by giving you this work, so I'm going to assess those skills in a different way. Also, if you do believe that students learn in different time frames, you're also thinking developmentally that they're getting more advanced in their way that they approach those student learning outcomes. So maybe that alternative assignment you give them is also more complex or more difficult than the original assignment. So if they want to turn in late work, fine. But here's the alternative assignment that is more complex than the original one to demonstrate how you're learning because you've grown since then. And that will cut down on the number of late assignments that you have to grade. Also, I don't know what the heck I meant by recording. Oh, yes, I do. So you can record the students who are consistently turning in late work, and you can develop basically an argument that this is a pattern, and therefore they're going to have a different standard than maybe what you give other students. You're going to differentiate how many late work or late assignments you allow them versus other students to prevent that pattern from continuing. All right, I'm at the 15-minute mark, so I'm going to go ahead and cut this short, and then I'm going to go ahead and start a second one.